Rich CEO left home for the biggest deal of his life. But on the way he saw a little girl behind the wheel. The reason stunned him. One morning a rich CEO left his home. He was very happy because the biggest deal of his life was waiting for him. $100 million contract was about to be signed, and he was sure this would be his greatest success. He sat in his car and moved toward the office. His heart was full of excitement. On the road he reached heavy traffic. Cars were stopped, horns were loud, and people were impatient. The CEO waited. But then suddenly his eyes fell on something that shook him deeply. In the middle of the jam, inside a small car, a little girl was sitting behind the wheel. She looked no older than 6. Her tiny hands were shaking on the steering. Tears were running down her face as she screamed, "Move away! Please, move away! My mother is very sick. She will die if I don't reach the hospital. Please let me go." Her voice was breaking, her face red from crying, but no one was helping her. Drivers only stared, some shouted, some laughed. But the girl kept crying, hitting the wheel, begging for space. The CEO's heart froze. He forgot about his meeting. He forgot about his deal. He quickly opened his car door and ran straight toward the child. His shoes splashed in the water, his suit brushed against the dirty cars. But he didn't care. He only cared about the little girl's desperate voice. When he reached her window and looked inside, he saw her mother. She was lying on the seat. Pale and weak, her chest rising slowly, fighting for every breath. The girl shook her again and again, whispering, "Mama, don't leave me, please stay with me. I will take you to the hospital, just don't leave me." The CEO felt his throat tighten. He had spent his whole life chasing money, but in this moment nothing mattered. Not millions. Not contracts. Only this child's cry. He opened the car door, lifted the girl gently, and told her, "Don't be afraid. I will help you. I will take your mother to the hospital." The girl looked at him with wide eyes full of tears and whispered, "Please save my mama." He slid behind the wheel, started the car, and with all his power drove fast through the traffic. His driver ran ahead, clearing the way. The horns, the angry shouts, the red lights. None of it mattered. All that mattered was the weak woman fighting to stay alive, and the little girl crying beside her. Every second felt like an hour. The girl kept begging, "Mama, don't close your eyes, we are almost there!" The CEO's heart pounded with her words. For the first time in his life, he felt true fear. The fear of losing someone's mother. Finally the hospital came into sight. He drove straight to the emergency doors, stopped the car hard, and shouted for help. Doctors and nurses rushed out. They placed the woman on a stretcher and pulled her inside. The girl ran after her, still crying, still begging her mother not to go. The CEO stood there, his chest heavy, watching them disappear inside. His deal, his millions, his empire, all of it felt empty. The only thing that mattered was that one little girl had trusted him in the worst moment of her life. The girl turned to him and whispered, "Thank you, sir. Thank you for saving my mama." The CEO closed his eyes for a moment. He knew his life would never be the same again. Doctors rushed the woman inside the emergency room while the little girl cried loudly in the hallway. Nurses tried to calm her, but she kept calling, "Mama. Don't leave me, please don't leave me." People looked, some whispered, but nobody stepped forward to help. The CEO stood near the door frozen. His heart was beating fast. He was a man who had controlled the biggest business meetings, but right now he had no control at all. The girl turned suddenly and ran toward him. She held his hand tightly, her fingers shaking. "Please don't leave me. You are the only one who helped me. Everyone else just watched. Please stay." The CEO bent down slowly and whispered, "I will not leave. I promise you." Her eyes filled with tears again as she hugged his arm. He guided her to a chair and sat beside her. Inside the emergency room, voices of doctors and machines echoed, and every second felt heavier than the last. Trying to comfort her, he asked softly, "What is your name?" She wiped her tears and said, "Emma." He nodded. "Emma, your mama is strong. The doctors are working hard. She will fight." But inside, fear was pressing on his own chest. Emma then asked something that cut through him like a knife. She whispered, "If my mama dies, will you take me with you? I don't want to be alone." The CEO felt his breath stop. He had lived his life surrounded by money but without family. No one had ever needed him this way before. He put a hand on her shoulder. Don't think like that. Your mama will be fine. The door of the emergency room opened, and Emma ran toward the doctor. Is my mama okay?
Tell me please.
She cried. The doctor's face was serious but calm. She is very weak, but we managed to stabilize her. If she had arrived even a little later, it might have been too late. She needs treatment and care. Emma broke down, crying with relief. The CEO closed his eyes, releasing a deep breath. The doctor looked at him next. Are you the father or relative? The CEO hesitated, then said, No. I just brought them here. The doctor frowned slightly but then replied, She cannot manage on her own. Someone needs to stay with her and the child for the next few days. The CEO looked at Emma, still holding his hand. His mind reminded him of the meeting. The $100 million deal, the success waiting for him. But when he saw her tear-stained face and her small hand clutching his tightly, the choice was already made. He looked at the doctor and said firmly, I will stay. Emma lifted her eyes to him. She didn't speak. She just hugged him tightly. As if she had found her whole world in that moment. And the CEO, who once thought wealth was only numbers and contracts, felt something more valuable than all the money he had ever made. David sat silently in his car, his thoughts spinning faster than the traffic that had just cleared. The image of the little girl crying for her mother was stuck in his mind. Her face, her tiny trembling hands, and her desperate words kept echoing in his head. Please help my mom, she needs surgery. He could not shake it off. That meeting he had been rushing toward, the biggest deal of his career, suddenly felt so small compared to the cry of that child. David was a man who had lived his life chasing numbers, contracts, and victories in the corporate world. But now, for the first time in years, he felt something break inside him. A wall he had built around his heart was beginning to crack. He parked the car on the side of the road. He leaned his head against the steering wheel, trying to control the storm inside him. Why do I care so much? He asked himself. He didn't know the girl, didn't know her story, didn't even know if what she said was true. Yet something about her innocence, something about the way she cried, touched a part of him that had been dead for too long. After a long pause, David picked up his phone. His secretary was waiting for him in the conference hall. Dozens of people were seated, waiting for his arrival. But he pressed the call button and spoke only a few words. I'm not coming. Cancel the meeting. There was silence on the other end, followed by shock in his assistant's voice. Sir, are you sure? This is the one deal you've been waiting for all year. David didn't explain. He simply said, just cancel it, and hung up. For the first time in his life, David chose a human over business. He turned his car around and drove back toward the hospital. He needed to know what happened to that little girl and her mother. When he reached, he rushed inside. The smell of disinfectant hit his nose, and the sight of worried families sitting in the lobby filled the air with heaviness. He searched the faces until he spotted her, the same girl, Emma. She was sitting alone on a bench, her teddy bear clutched tightly to her chest. Her eyes were red from crying, but she was no longer screaming. She just sat there, silent and broken. David slowly walked toward her. He felt strangely nervous, like he was stepping into a life he didn't belong to. But when Emma looked up and saw him, something inside him shifted. Her eyes widened with recognition. And for the first time, a faint glimmer of hope appeared on her face. You came back, she whispered, her voice fragile. David knelt down so he could meet her at eye level. Yes, I came back. Tell me about your mother. What happened to her? Tears welled up in Emma's eyes again. She collapsed last night. The doctors said she needs surgery, but we don't have money. I tried asking people, but nobody listened. They all just walked away. Her small fingers squeezed the teddy bear tighter. David's chest ached as he listened. He remembered how many times he himself had walked away from people in need. He had lived in a world of power where money was everything. But in this moment, money meant nothing if it couldn't save this child's mother. What's your mother's name? He asked softly. Her name is Sarah, Emma replied, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. David nodded. Take me to her. Emma led him down the corridor, her tiny steps echoing on the cold floor. They reached a room where a pale woman lay on the hospital bed. Tubes and machines surrounded her. Her breathing was shallow, and her face looked drained of all strength. David froze for a moment. Sarah looked younger than he expected, maybe in her early 30s. She had the same gentle features as Emma. He could instantly tell this woman had struggled her entire life, yet still carried a quiet dignity even in pain. A doctor walked in, checking the charts at the end of the bed. David stood up quickly and asked, "What's her condition?" The doctor looked at him, a little surprised. "Are you family?" Before David could answer, Emma clung to his arm and said softly, "He's helping us." The doctor gave a small nod. "She needs urgent heart surgery. Without it, she doesn't have much time. The problem is it's expensive. Around $50,000. We've already told the little girl, but there's nothing more we can do unless payment is arranged." David's jaw tightened. $50,000. For him. That was a fraction of what he spent on a single business trip, a number he wouldn't even notice missing from his account. But for this little girl, it was an impossible mountain. He looked down at Emma, who was staring at him with wide, pleading eyes. She didn't say a word, but he could see her silent question. "Will you help?" Without hesitation, David turned back to the doctor. "Prepare everything. I'll cover the cost." The doctor blinked, stunned. "Are you serious? That's a large amount." David interrupted firmly. "I said, prepare everything. Time is running out, isn't it?" The doctor nodded quickly and left the room. Emma gasped, her little mouth opening wide. You'll really help my mom?" David smiled for the first time in a long time. A real, genuine smile. He gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "Yes. Your mom will be fine, I promise." Tears of relief streamed down Emma's cheeks. She threw her tiny arms around him, hugging him as tightly as she could. David felt something inside his chest that no business deal, no amount of money, had ever given him. It was warmth, it was purpose, it was humanity. As the nurses prepared Sarah for surgery, David stepped outside the room. He called his bank and arranged the transfer immediately. For once, he didn't care about profits or board approvals. This wasn't business. This was life. While waiting, David sat beside Emma in the hallway. She rested her head on his arm, exhausted from crying. He looked down at her and whispered, "You're very brave, you know that. Most adults wouldn't have the courage to do what you did today." Emma's sleepy voice replied, "I just don't want to lose my mom. She's all I have." David's throat tightened. He thought of his own childhood, of how he had lost people he loved and buried the pain under ambition. He realized now that maybe life was giving him a second chance, not just to save Sarah, but to save himself. The doors of the operating room finally closed, and the surgery began. David sat silently, his mind heavy but strangely calm. For the first time, he wasn't worried about contracts, deals, or his company's future. For the first time, he was simply human. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning of a story that would change all of their lives forever. David drove away from the crowded street, his thoughts restless. The image of the little girl crying inside the car had shaken something deep within him. For years he had trained himself to stay focused on business, numbers and deals. But what he had seen was not just a random street scene. It was a cry that went straight into his soul. As he parked near the office, the weight of his upcoming deal still pressed heavily on his mind. This was supposed to be the biggest moment of his career. The turning point that would mark him as one of the most powerful men in the city. Yet, all he could hear in his mind was the girl's trembling voices. "Help my mom. She can't breathe." He tried to shake it off, walking into the tall glass building that reflected the morning sun. The lobby was buzzing with assistants, lawyers, and partners waiting for him. Everyone greeted him with respect, their eyes shining with expectation. They all knew today was history in the making. David was about to sign a deal worth billions, the kind of deal that secured power for generations. But instead of feeling pride, David felt emptiness. He sat at the head of the long conference table, papers neatly stacked before him, executives lining up with smiles that barely hid their greed. As the meeting started, his pen hovered over the contract, his hand trembled, the room waited in silence. For a moment, he imagined himself signing it. The cameras would flash, the media would announce his triumph, and his empire would rise even higher. But then he remembered the girl's eyes, wet with tears, full of fear and innocence. What good was power if he ignored the helpless? He placed the pen down slowly. The boardroom shifted uncomfortably. His lawyer whispered, "Sir, is there a problem?" David stood up, his voice calm but firm. "I'll sign this deal later. Right now? Something else is more important." Before anyone could protest, he walked out, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces. The whispers started instantly. Some thought he was insane, others thought it was a negotiating tactic. But David knew the truth: this was not about business anymore. It was about humanity. He got back into his car and drove straight to the place where he had seen the girl. His heart raced as he searched the streets. Finally, he spotted the same small, broken car parked on the side of the road. The little girl was still inside, clutching her mother's hand. Her eyes widened when she saw him again. David rushed out of his car and knocked gently on the window. "It's okay. I'm here to help," he said softly. The girl hesitated, then unlocked the door. Her face was pale and her tiny hands trembled. "Please, sir, my mom can't breathe. She's not waking up." David bent down and checked the woman. Her breathing was shallow, her lips faintly blue. Without wasting a second, he picked up his phone and called for an ambulance. His usually calm businesslike voice now carried urgency. "This is David Miller. I need an ambulance immediately. Send it to Oakwood Street, near the old market." He stayed with them until the sirens arrived, comforting the girl, keeping her steady. When the paramedics took her mother inside the ambulance, the girl clung to David's hand, as if he were her only anchor in the world. "Will she be okay?" the girl whispered, her voice breaking. David knelt down to her level, meeting her frightened eyes. "Yes," he said firmly. Though he wasn't entirely sure. "They'll do everything to help her. And I'll make sure you're not alone." The ambulance drove away. And David followed in his car, his entire schedule forgotten. At the hospital, he covered all the admission costs without hesitation. Doctors rushed the woman into emergency care, while David sat with the girl in the waiting room. Time passed slowly. For once in his life, David didn't care about the ticking clock, or the phone buzzing in his pocket with messages about the deal. All that mattered was the fragile child sitting beside him. After hours, the doctor came out, removing his mask. "She's stable now," he said. Relief washed over the girl, and tears streamed down her face. She hugged David tightly, as if he had been the miracle she was waiting for. In that moment, David realized something: all the money, the power, the deals, they were meaningless compared to this single embrace. This was real success. This was purpose. As he drove home late that night, the city lights glowing around him, David felt different. He had walked away from the biggest deal of his life. But he had walked into something far greater. The world saw him as a powerful CEO, but deep inside, he was just a man who had been reminded of what truly mattered. David walked into his office the next morning. But his mind was not inside the room. The files on his desk, the reports waiting for signatures. The calls lined up with board members. None of it could pull him away from the image of Emma sitting alone on that hospital bench. He had left her with a promise. But that promise now weighed heavier than any business deal in his life. For the first time, money, power, and success felt empty without meaning. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He asked himself why he even cared so much. She was just a girl he had met by accident. Yet, something inside him had shifted. He thought about her little sister lying in a hospital bed, needing surgery. And about the courage Emma showed while begging strangers for help. That kind of strength and innocence touched something in him that he had buried long ago. When his assistant came in with the day's agenda, David raised his hand and stopped her. "Clear my schedule. No meetings today." She blinked in surprise but nodded quickly. David stood up, grabbed his coat, and walked out without looking back. His destination was clear. He was going back to the hospital. Emma was still there, sitting by the same bench. Her face lit up when she saw him approaching, though she quickly tried to hide it, afraid he might see her hope. David sat down next to her and asked softly, "How is your sister today?" Emma sighed. "She's stable. But the doctors say the surgery can't be delayed anymore. If we don't pay soon, they might refuse to continue treatment." Her voice cracked at the end. and she turned her face away so he wouldn't see her tears. David placed a hand on the bench between them. "Emma, I want you to trust me. I'm not going to let your sister suffer. I'll take care of it." She turned to him quickly, shocked. "Why? Why would you do this for me? You don't even know us. People don't just help like that." David looked at her with a steady gaze. "Because once, a long time ago, I was in a situation not too different from yours. I had no one to turn to, and I wished for a miracle. Nobody came. I don't want you to feel that same loneliness." Emma's eyes softened. She wanted to believe him. But she was scared. Too many promises had been broken in her life. Still, there was something in his voice, something so real, that she felt a warmth spread through her chest. That afternoon, David walked straight to the hospital's billing office. He asked for Emma's sister's file, and quietly cleared the entire payment. The staff stared at him in disbelief when they saw the numbers on the check. But he didn't blink. For him, it wasn't about the money. It was about what it meant. When Emma found out, she ran after him in the hospital corridor, tears streaming down her face.
"David!
"You didn't have to do that!" she cried, her voice shaking between gratitude and guilt. He stopped and turned toward her. "Yes, I did. Emma, your sister deserves a chance at life. And you deserve to breathe without this weight crushing you. Don't fight me on this. Let me help." Emma broke down and hugged him tightly, surprising even herself. David froze for a second, then slowly wrapped his arms around her. For the first time in years, he felt a kind of peace that no corporate victory had ever given him. Over the next few days, David visited the hospital every evening. He sat with Emma, brought food for her, and sometimes even read stories to her sister when she was awake. The nurses noticed the bond forming between them, whispering to each other about the wealthy businessman who suddenly looked more human when he was with the girl. Emma, too, began to notice things about David. Beneath his sharp, polished exterior, there was a man who carried scars of his own. Sometimes when he thought she wasn't watching, his eyes drifted off as if he were remembering something painful. She wanted to ask, but she didn't push him. She knew some wounds revealed themselves in time. One evening, as they sat together outside the hospital cafeteria, Emma asked softly, "Why do you always look so sad when you think no one is watching?" David hesitated, then sighed. "Because I lost someone once. Someone I thought I would protect forever. And I failed. Since then, I buried myself in work, in money, in success. But it never filled the hole inside me." Emma listened quietly. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge. She just let him speak. And that silence was the kindest thing anyone had given him in years. "Maybe," Emma whispered after a pause, "this time you didn't fail. Maybe helping my sister is your second chance." Her words pierced straight through him. He had never thought of it like that. For a long moment, he just stared at her, seeing not just a desperate girl fighting for her sister, but someone who had unknowingly breathed life back into his own soul. The surgery was scheduled for the next week. On the day of the operation, Emma was trembling, her hands cold as ice. David stayed by her side, holding her hand tightly. "She's going to be fine," he assured her. "Trust me." Hours passed like years, but finally the doctor came out with a smile. The surgery was successful. "She's going to recover fully." Emma collapsed into David's arms, sobbing uncontrollably, this time out of relief. "Thank you. David, thank you." She kept repeating, her words muffled against his chest. David held her close, his own eyes misting. He realized that in saving her sister, he had saved himself too. That night, when they left the hospital, the city lights seemed brighter. Emma looked up at David and said quietly, "I don't know how to repay you." He smiled gently. "You don't need to. Just promise me one thing." "What?" she asked. "Don't stop believing in kindness. Even when the world is cruel, hold on to that belief. That will be enough for me." Emma nodded, her eyes shining with tears, and for the first time in a long while, David felt like he wasn't walking alone anymore. The sun was beginning to set, painting the city sky with streaks of gold and orange. But David's mind was far from the beauty of the evening. He sat in his office, leaning forward in his chair, staring at the contract on his desk. The numbers, the clauses, the legal language, all of it blurred together, because his thoughts kept going back to one image. Emma holding that worn teddy bear with tears in her eyes. It had been days since that encounter outside the hospital, but her voice still echoed in his head. Please. Sir, buy my teddy bear, my sister needs surgery. It was the kind of moment most powerful men would dismiss, but David couldn't. That single plea had cracked open something in him that had been locked away for years. He remembered his own childhood. Lonely. Filled with cold halls and stricter rules than love. He had built his empire as a way to escape those memories. But now here was Emma, forcing him to confront them again. His assistant entered quietly. Sir, the board is waiting. We need your approval on this acquisition. David looked up, his jaw tight. Tell them I'll be there shortly. The assistant hesitated, then added softly, Sir, you've missed 3 meetings this week. The directors are beginning to ask questions. David waved him off, but the words lingered. He was slipping out of routine. Something he had never allowed himself to do before. But this time was different. For the first time in years, he didn't care about the empire as much as he cared about one little girl and her desperate plea. After the office emptied for the night, David pulled out his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen. He had instructed his driver to follow Emma that day, and find out where she lived. The information had been sitting in his files ever since, but he hadn't acted on it. Now he opened the address and stared at it. A small, broken-down apartment building on the edge of the city. David grabbed his coat and walked out. The drive wasn't long. But the neighborhood felt like a different world, compared to the towering skyscrapers of his business district. Cracked sidewalks, flickering streetlights, and weary faces painted a picture of struggle. His black car stood out, sleek and polished, drawing the eyes of every passerby. He ignored the stairs and focused on the building ahead. As he climbed the narrow stairs, he heard a child's cough echoing from one of the apartments. His heart sank. He knocked gently on the door that matched the address. After a pause, the door opened slightly. Emma stood there, clutching the same teddy bear, her eyes widening with surprise. Why, you, she whispered, almost afraid. David gave a small nod. Yes, Emma, it's me. May I come in? She hesitated, then slowly opened the door wider. Inside, the apartment was dimly lit. The walls were peeling, and the furniture was worn. On a small bed in the corner lay a younger girl, pale and weak, with tubes connected to her arm. She stirred when she saw him, and Emma rushed to her side. This is my sister Lily, Emma said softly. Her voice trembled with both pride and fear. David's chest tightened. The child looked fragile. Like a flower struggling to bloom. He had seen many battles in the business world, but nothing had prepared him for this sight. She's been sick for months. Emma continued, brushing her sister's hair. The doctors said surgery could help, but I don't have the money. I thought maybe if I sold the teddy bear, someone kind would help. I didn't know it would be you. Her words cut into him like a knife. David walked closer. Lowering himself into a chair near the bed. Emma, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. You should never have to sell something so precious to you just to save your sister. That's not how the world should work. Emma's eyes filled with tears. But it is how it works. No one listens to people like us. David felt his throat tighten. He had spent his life climbing ladders, crushing opponents, building wealth, and yet in this tiny room he realized the truth. None of it mattered if he couldn't use it to change lives. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. Tomorrow morning, you'll go to this hospital, he said, handing it to her. The best doctors in the city will see Lily. The surgery will be arranged, and all costs will be covered. Do you understand? Emma stared at the card, then at him. Disbelief washing over her face. But why? Why would you do this for us? David leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. Because you reminded me of something I had forgotten. You reminded me what it means to be human. You showed me courage, Emma. More courage than I've seen in boardrooms filled with powerful men. You made me remember what really matters. Emma's lips trembled, and she whispered. But David wasn't finished. I don't want this to be just about money. I want to be here for you both. Not as a stranger. Not as someone who buys a teddy bear. But as someone who cares. For the first time in years, David's voice cracked. He wasn't the untouchable CEO at this moment. He was simply a man who had found meaning again. The following morning, David personally accompanied Emma and Lily to the hospital. Nurses and doctors rushed to prepare. Surprised to see the most powerful man in the city, sitting quietly in a waiting room, holding a little girl's teddy bear for her, while she went into surgery. Hours passed, and with each tick of the clock, David felt his walls crumble. He had faced billion-dollar risks without blinking. But waiting for news about Lily felt like the hardest trial of his life. Finally, the surgeon came out with a smile. The operation was successful. She will need recovery, but she is going to be fine. Emma broke down in tears of relief, clutching David's hand. He held her tightly, feeling something he hadn't felt in decades. A sense of family, a sense of belonging. As Lily was wheeled out, still asleep but stable, David knew his life had changed forever. The empire he had built suddenly seemed meaningless compared to this moment. For the first time, he realized true wealth was not in what he owned, but in the lives he touched. And in that hospital hallway, with Emma beside him and Lily safe, David made a silent vow. He would never let them struggle alone again. David sat in his office late at night, staring at the glowing city lights outside the glass window. The skyline was alive, but his heart felt heavy. Ever since that moment outside the hospital, when Emma had begged him to buy her teddy bear for her sister's surgery, his life had taken a turn he never expected. He was no longer just the powerful CEO making billion-dollar deals. He was a man who couldn't shake the voice of a little girl who had cried in front of him. Emma's eyes haunted him. He remembered the way her small hands clutched that teddy bear like it was her last piece of hope. He remembered the desperation in her voice, the tears that rolled down her cheeks, and the courage it took for her to stop a stranger like him. That night, David had already helped with her sister's surgery bills. But something inside him told him that his role in this story wasn't finished. He wasn't just meant to walk away after signing a check. There was something deeper pulling him back toward Emma and her family. His assistant, Michael, knocked on the door and entered quietly. "Sir, you haven't left the office all day. Do you want me to prepare the car?" David shook his head. "Not yet, Michael. I need you to do something for me. Find out everything you can about that little girl Emma. And her sister." Michael looked surprised. His boss never got personally involved in anything outside of business. But the tone in David's voice left no room for questions. "Yes, sir. I'll handle it first thing in the morning." When Michael left, David leaned back in his chair. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about numbers, contracts or profits. He was thinking about a child who had shown more bravery than most adults he knew. The next morning, David received the report. Emma lived in a small apartment with her mother and her younger sister Lily, the one who had been in surgery. Their father had passed away years ago, leaving the family struggling. The mother worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, and Emma had stepped in to take care of Lily. As David read through the details, his chest tightened. This wasn't just a sad story. This was survival. And Emma at such a young age was carrying responsibilities far beyond her years. Without hesitation, David told Michael, "Prepare the car. I want to see them." When he arrived at the small apartment building, the contrast between his world and theirs struck him hard. The hallways were narrow, the paint peeling, the air heavy. He knocked on the door, and after a moment, Emma's mother opened it. She looked tired, her eyes showing the weight of countless sleepless nights. "Mr. David?" she asked, shocked to see the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the country standing at her door. "Yes," David said gently. "I hope I'm not intruding. I came to see Emma and Lily." Emma ran forward from the small living room, her face lighting up when she saw him. "You came back," she said with pure joy. David knelt down, meeting her at eye level. "Of course I came back. I told you that teddy bear wasn't the only reason I stopped. How's your sister?" Emma's eyes softened. "She's getting better. The doctors said the surgery went well. Thank you, you saved her." Those words pierced David's heart. He had saved countless companies, closed massive deals, and created jobs for thousands. But never once had he felt this kind of fulfillment. Saving a child's life, it was different. He asked if he could see Lily, and Emma led him to the small bedroom. Lily was lying in bed, pale but smiling weakly. She clutched the teddy bear tightly against her chest. When she saw David, she whispered, "Emma told me you're the man who helped me. Thank you." David smiled warmly. "No, Lily. You're the strong one. You fought hard. I just gave a little push." He stayed with them longer than he expected, listening to Emma's mother explain their struggles. How Emma had been more of a parent than a child, and how Lily's illness had nearly broken them. On his way back home, David couldn't stop thinking. This wasn't just charity. This was personal. For the first time in his life, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond wealth. Days turned into weeks. And David kept visiting. He helped with Lily's recovery, made sure they had enough food, and even arranged tutors so Emma wouldn't fall behind in school. Emma grew attached to him, seeing him not as a powerful CEO, but as someone who cared. One evening, as they sat together in the hospital garden, Emma looked at him with her innocent eyes and asked, "David, why are you helping us so much? You don't even know us." David was silent for a moment. Then he said softly, "Because, Emma, you reminded me of something I forgot. You reminded me what it means to fight for someone you love, and maybe you reminded me of the family I lost." Emma tilted her head. "You lost your family too?" David nodded. "Yes, years ago. I buried myself in work because I didn't know how to face the pain. But then I met you, and I realized, I can't keep running from life. Maybe helping you and Lily is my way of remembering them." Emma reached out and held his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his. "Then we'll be your family too. You're not alone anymore." Tears stung David's eyes, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. At that moment, he knew Emma was right. He wasn't alone anymore. The bond between them grew stronger, and soon, everyone around David began to notice the change. His employees saw him smile more. He spent less time buried in papers and more time thinking about how to create opportunities for children like Emma. His cold heart was melting piece by piece. But deep down, David knew this was only the beginning. Life had brought Emma into his path for a reason. And that reason was far greater than he could yet understand. The night in the hospital was quieter than most. But the weight inside Emma's heart made every second feel heavy. Lily lay asleep in the bed, her breathing steady but fragile, while Emma sat beside her, holding her sister's hand as if afraid that letting go would mean losing her. She had been through countless nights like this. Nights filled with uncertainty, fear, and desperate prayers. But tonight was different, because now she wasn't alone. David had become a part of their story in a way Emma could never have predicted. Just days ago, he had been a stranger, a man passing by, someone whose life had no connection to hers. Yet now, as she glanced at him sitting quietly in the chair by the window, she felt a strange sense of security. He wasn't family, he wasn't bound by obligation. And yet he was here, choosing to stay. David looked at the little girl resting peacefully. Something about Lily reminded him of himself. Maybe the innocence in her face or the way she held on despite the pain. He thought back to his own childhood. To nights when he had prayed for someone to notice his struggles. No one had. He had survived by building walls, by becoming stronger, by learning to face the world alone. But now, watching Lily and Emma, he realized that strength wasn't about shutting people out. It was about showing up when it mattered most. Emma broke the silence. "You don't have to stay. You know, you've done so much already, I can't expect more." David leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Emma, I'm not here because I have to be. I'm here because I want to be. You and Lily, you matter." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. No one had spoken words like that to her in years. People had always left, walked away when life got too complicated. But David's presence felt different. It was as though he carried a strength that she could lean on. Hours passed, and the night stretched into dawn. The doctor entered the room early in the morning, reviewing Lily's reports. Emma's heart raced as she waited for the news. "How is she?" she asked, her voice trembling. The doctor gave a small nod. "She's stable. But we still need to prepare for her surgery soon. Without it, her condition could worsen. The good news is, the operation has a strong chance of success." Relief washed over Emma, but with it came the familiar fear. Money. She had no way to pay for such an expensive procedure. She tried to hide the panic in her eyes, but David noticed instantly. When the doctor left, David spoke firmly. "Emma, don't worry about the cost. I told you before, I'll take care of it." She shook her head quickly. "David, I can't let you do that, it's too much. You've already done more than I could ever ask." His gaze met hers, unwavering. "Emma, this isn't charity. It's me doing what I should. Sometimes life gives us moments to do the right thing, and this is mine. Let me help Lily." Emma's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to argue, but deep down she knew she couldn't. She had fought this battle alone for so long, and here was someone willing to fight with her. For once, she allowed herself to breathe, to accept the possibility that she didn't have to carry everything on her shoulders. Later that day, Emma and David walked outside the hospital for some air while Lily rested. The sun was shining, but Emma barely noticed. Her thoughts were tangled between gratitude, fear, and confusion. She glanced at David and asked softly, "Why me? Why us? You could have walked away that first day and never looked back. But you didn't. Why?" David took a moment before answering. "Because I saw something in you. The way you fought for Lily. The way you didn't give up even when everything was against you. It reminded me of what I've been missing. I spent my whole life building walls, chasing success, thinking money would fill the emptiness. But when I met you and Lily, I realized what really matters: family, love, hope. And I don't want to walk away from that." Emma's heart tightened at his words. No one had ever looked at her like that before, with such honesty. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by pain and loss. As the days passed, David became even more involved in Lily's care. He spoke with doctors, arranged for the best specialists, and made sure every detail was handled. Emma watched him with growing admiration. He wasn't just a man with wealth, he was a man with compassion. Someone who cared deeply without asking for anything in return. One evening, Lily woke up and smiled weakly at David. "Are you really going to help me get better?" she asked in her small, fragile voice. David knelt beside her bed, his eyes gentle. "Yes, Lily. I promise you. We're going to get through this together." Lily's smile widened, and she reached out to hold his hand. "Then you're like my big brother now." The words struck David deeply. He had never known what it was like to be a brother, to belong to a family that truly cared. Hearing Lily say that filled a hole in his heart he hadn't even realized was still there. He squeezed her hand gently. "I'd be honored to be your big brother." Emma watched the scene with tears in her eyes. Her sister's laughter, faint but real, was a sound she thought she might never hear again. And it was all because of David. That night, as Emma and David sat by the window, she whispered, "You've changed everything for us. I don't even know how to thank you." David looked at her, his voice steady. "Emma, you don't have to thank me. Just let me be here. That's all I want." For the first time in years, Emma felt hope blooming inside her heart. She realized that maybe, just maybe, miracles did happen. Not always in the form of sudden cures or dramatic rescues, but sometimes in the form of people who showed up when you least expected them. And David was that miracle. David sat quietly in his office, his hands resting on the table, his mind torn between the world of contracts, deadlines, and profits, and the world that Emma and Lily had shown him. For years, his life had been defined by numbers, deals and competition. He had built an empire brick by brick. But every brick had been laid with ambition, not compassion. Yet now, for the first time in decades, he was questioning what kind of empire he truly wanted to leave behind. The image of Emma's fragile smile, and Lily's hopeful eyes wouldn't leave his mind. That little girl's laughter when she clutched her teddy bear, replayed in his head over and over again, as if it was a soundtrack of innocence that he had never known in his own life. He realized that these two sisters had unknowingly opened a door inside him, that he had kept locked for far too long. A door to feelings he thought had no place in his world. His assistant walked in with a folder, but he waved it away. "Not now," David said, his voice lower than usual. She gave him a confused look but left without another word. David leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "What am I doing?" he thought. "Why do I care so much about them?" That night, instead of attending a grand corporate dinner where he was supposed to make an important announcement. David drove across the city to the small neighborhood where Emma and Lily lived. The streets were narrow, the houses old, and the people worn out by life's struggles. Yet there was something genuine here, something he never felt in his towering skyscrapers or luxury hotels. He stopped his car and walked through the street quietly, trying not to attract attention. From a distance, he saw the small apartment where Emma lived. The light in the window glowed softly. He could hear Lily's laughter echoing faintly into the night. His chest tightened. That sound felt like hope. Emma noticed him from the doorway, surprised. "David, what are you doing here?" she asked, stepping outside. He hesitated, then spoke. I couldn't stop thinking about you and Lily." His voice carried a sincerity that even surprised him. "I wanted to see how you both were doing." Emma's expression softened, though she still looked uncertain. "We're managing," she replied, though her tired eyes betrayed the truth. "It's not easy, but Lily, she keeps me strong." David looked at her for a long moment. "You've carried too much for someone your age," he said gently. "You shouldn't have to fight this battle alone." Emma shook her head. "We don't have a choice. Life didn't give us one." For a while, they stood in silence. The city noise faded in the background. It was just the two of them. Two people from completely different worlds standing face to face, realizing how much their lives had already intertwined. Finally, David broke the silence. "Emma, I want to help. Not just with Lily's treatment but with everything. You deserve a chance at life too." Emma's eyes widened. "David, I don't want to be someone you pity." He shook his head firmly. "This isn't pity. This is something else. Maybe I don't even understand it yet, but I know it's real." At that moment, Lily came running out with her teddy bear in her arms. "David," she said excitedly, her small feet pattering against the ground. She hugged his leg tightly as if he belonged there. David bent down, his heart swelling in a way he never thought possible, and hugged her back. Emma's eyes softened even more as she watched them. That sight said everything words could not. From that day, David became a regular presence in their lives. He would stop by to bring groceries, help with bills, or simply sit with them and share stories. Lily adored him, seeing in him not just a helper but a father figure she had never known. Emma, though cautious at first, slowly began to trust him. His actions spoke louder than his wealth ever could. But the more he spent time with them, the more David began to question the path he had built for himself. For years, his only goal had been to expand his empire. Now for the first time, he wondered what the point of all that power was if it couldn't bring him the peace he felt in that small apartment. Late one evening, David returned to his penthouse. The silence felt heavier than ever before. He looked around at the expensive furniture, the art on the walls, the view of the city skyline, and realized it all felt empty. None of it compared to the warmth of Lily's hug or the strength in Emma's smile. He poured himself a glass of water and sat by the window, deep in thought. He knew he was standing at a crossroads. One path was the life he had always known: power, wealth, and influence. The other path was uncertain, but it was calling to him louder every day, a path of love, sacrifice, and something far more valuable than money. The next morning, he made a decision. He called Emma. "I want you and Lily to move into a safer place," he said. "I'll take care of everything." Emma resisted at first, insisting she didn't want to rely on him. But David was patient. "This isn't about me saving you," he told her. "It's about giving Lily the future she deserves. And maybe giving all of us a second chance." After a long pause, Emma finally whispered, "All right." That single word changed everything. Together, they began to take small steps toward a new life. David arranged for Lily's medical treatments with the best doctors, while also making sure Emma could continue her studies. Slowly, hope started to replace fear in their lives. But even as happiness began to grow, David knew challenges lay ahead. His world of business wasn't kind to men who showed vulnerability. Whispers had already begun in his company. Questions about why their powerful CEO was spending so much time in a poor neighborhood. He knew sooner or later he would have to face the consequences of choosing a different path. Still, as he watched Lily sleep peacefully one evening, holding her teddy bear tightly, David knew one thing for certain. No amount of money or power could ever replace the love he was beginning to feel for this small family. And that realization gave him a strength he had never known before. The man who once only lived for profit was now living for something much greater. And deep inside, David knew. This was only the beginning of a battle between the world he had built, and the world his heart was leading him toward. David had always thought of himself as a man who could handle anything life threw at him. Business rivals, economic downturns, the constant weight of running a billion-dollar empire, he had survived it all. But now, sitting beside Emma in the small hospital room, with Lily's faint breathing filling the silence, he felt something he had never truly known before: helplessness. The world outside was rushing, deals were being signed, contracts were being sealed, stocks were rising and falling, but in this small room, none of that mattered. What mattered was the fragile life of a little girl, who had never even seen the world's brighter side. Emma sat quietly on the edge of the bed, her hand gently stroking Lily's hair. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but there was a fierce determination in them. "I won't let her go," she whispered under her breath, more to herself than to David. "Not after everything we've been through." David's chest tightened as he looked at her. Emma had grown up in hardship, carrying responsibilities that were far beyond her years. She had begged strangers to save her sister, carried shame she never deserved, and still found the strength to smile for Lily. It wasn't just courage. It was love in its purest form. He couldn't help but feel that somewhere along the way, Emma had become the strongest person he knew. Breaking the silence, David leaned forward. "The doctors said we have one chance left. The surgery is risky, but it could save her. And I've already spoken to the best surgeon in the country. He's willing to fly in tonight. Money, resources, time, none of it matters to me anymore. All I want is for Lily to live." Emma's lips trembled as she looked at him, her voice soft but firm. "Why are you doing all this for us, David? You don't owe me anything. You could walk away, and no one would blame you." Her words pierced him. He leaned back slightly, drawing in a breath. "Maybe I don't owe you," he admitted, "but I owe myself. For years, I've lived in a world where success meant power, and power meant loneliness. And then, one day, I saw you, standing in the street, holding a teddy bear, begging a stranger to help. That image hasn't left my mind. It was the first time I realized how blind I had been to what really matters. You and Lily, you've given me something I thought I could never feel again." Emma blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "And what's that?" "Family," he said simply. The word hung in the air, powerful and heavy. Emma's heart raced, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. She had been guarding her emotions, afraid of hoping for too much. But now, hearing David speak with such sincerity, she felt her walls crumble just a little more. That evening, preparations for Lily's surgery began. David made sure every detail was perfect. The surgeon arrived. The hospital's best staff assembled, and all necessary equipment was brought in. David stood beside Emma as they wheeled Lily into the operating room. Emma clutched her sister's hand until the last moment, whispering promises of a better tomorrow. When the doors closed, Emma sank into the chair outside, her hands trembling. David sat next to her, his presence steady and grounding. "She's in good hands," he reassured her. "We'll get through this." Hours passed like years. Every tick of the clock echoed in the silence. Emma prayed silently, her fingers intertwined tightly as though holding on to faith itself. David, though quiet, never left her side. Occasionally he reached over, gently placing his hand over hers, reminding her she wasn't alone anymore. Finally, the doors swung open, and the surgeon stepped out, removing his mask. His face was serious, but his eyes carried a hint of relief. "The surgery was successful," he announced. "It will take time for Lily to recover, but she's strong. She has a real chance now." Emma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as tears poured down her cheeks. She turned to David, and for the first time, she threw her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. "Thank you," she whispered over and over. "Thank you for saving her." David held her tightly, his own throat tightening. "We saved her," he corrected softly. "Together." For the next few days Emma rarely left Lily's side. David visited every morning and stayed late into the night, bringing food, speaking with doctors, and making sure Emma rested whenever possible. The bond between them grew stronger with every passing moment. One night, as Lily slept peacefully, Emma and David sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Emma spoke quietly, her voice carrying a mixture of exhaustion and hope. "When I was younger, I used to dream about a life where Lily, and I didn't have to struggle for everything. A life where she could go to school, have friends, and smile without worrying about tomorrow. I thought that dream had died a long time ago. But now, maybe it's possible again." David looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "It is possible," he said firmly. "And I'll make sure of it. You'll never have to carry this burden alone again." Emma turned to him, searching his eyes. "Why me, David? Out of all the people in your world, why are you choosing me?" He leaned closer, his voice low but full of conviction. "Because you remind me of everything good I lost. And because I don't want to lose you too." Her breath caught, and she felt her heart stumble in her chest. She didn't reply immediately, but deep down, she knew her life had already begun to change in ways she couldn't deny. The days that followed brought small but precious victories. Lily opened her eyes and smiled weakly at Emma. She whispered her first words after surgery, asking if the teddy bear was still by her side. Emma showed it to her, holding it up with trembling hands, and Lily giggled softly, a sound that filled the room with warmth. David, standing at the doorway, watched them with quiet joy. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive. This wasn't about charity anymore. It wasn't about doing the right thing for his conscience. It was about love. Something he had run from for far too long. And as he watched Emma tuck Lily into bed, whispering a lullaby, David knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was only the beginning of their story. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of David's office, reflecting off the sleek surfaces of his high-rise penthouse. But for the first time in weeks, David felt a tension that had nothing to do with contracts or quarterly earnings. His phone vibrated repeatedly, each notification carrying the weight of a world he had tried to keep at a distance. Social media alerts, news headlines, and private messages all spoke the same truth. Someone had noticed his actions with Emma and Lily, and the story was spreading fast. David rubbed his temples, the familiar pressure of the corporate world pressing down on him once again. This was a world where image mattered, where every action was scrutinized, and where a CEO showing too much compassion could be considered a weakness. He had built his empire on strength, on appearing untouchable. Yet, here he was, caught between the warmth he felt for Emma and Lily and the cold, unyielding expectations of the people who measured him only in profits and influence. Meanwhile, in the small neighborhood that had become a sanctuary for Emma and Lily, life carried on with a fragile sense of peace. Lily was awake, her eyes brighter than they had been in weeks, and Emma sat at the edge of her bed, organizing pills, checking vitals, and making sure that the small routine they had established was uninterrupted. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, but also of flowers David had insisted on bringing for Lily, a small gesture that made Emma smile despite the undercurrent of worry she felt. The first knock on the apartment door was gentle, almost tentative, but Emma recognized the sound instantly. David's presence at their doorstep had become as normal as breathing, yet still, each time he arrived, a quiet thrill ran through her. She opened the door to see him holding a small bag of groceries, the weight of his responsibility, and the tenderness in his eyes mingling into something unspoken. "Morning," he said simply, his voice carrying the calm assurance she had come to rely on. Emma nodded, taking the bag from him, her fingers brushing against his briefly. "Morning. You didn't have to. I wanted to," he interrupted, smiling softly. "I'll always want to." There was comfort in those words, and yet the outside world was beginning to intrude. As David left the apartment later that morning, his driver waiting silently, he passed a small cafe where a group of journalists lingered with cameras pointed at his penthouse. The whispers had already started, speculating about the mysterious family he had been visiting so frequently. It wasn't long before the first headlines appeared online. CEO of multi-billion-dollar empire spotted in low-income neighborhood. Is philanthropy a cover story? David's phone rang again. It was Michael, his assistant. Voice tense over the line, "Sir, the board has seen the coverage. They want a meeting immediately. They're questioning your recent activities, questioning why you're involving yourself personally with Emma and her sister." David leaned back in his chair. Closing his eyes for a moment, he had anticipated resistance, but the speed and intensity of it caught him off guard. "Set up the meeting for this afternoon," he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of determination. "And Michael, tell them I'll answer every question." The afternoon sun was high when David entered the boardroom. The familiar space of power and negotiation now feeling like a stage set against him. The board members were already seated, their expressions sharp, expectant, and slightly judgmental. He took his place at the head of the table, meeting their gazes without flinching. They had questions, and he intended to answer them honestly. "David," began one of the senior board members, a man whose face was carved from years of business battles, "we've seen the reports. You've been spending an extraordinary amount of time, and resources, on a private matter. Care to explain why the CEO of this company is personally involved with a child and her family?" David's hands rested calmly on the polished table. "I can explain," he said, his tone steady. "It's not a business matter, and yes, it required personal attention. But I believe it's worth it." The room fell silent, some leaning back, others frowning. One woman, known for her meticulous approach to numbers and reputation, spoke next. "David, this isn't a question of worth. This is a question of responsibility. Our investors, our shareholders, they want to see decisions made for the growth and stability of the company, not personal projects. How do you justify this?" David met her gaze. Unwavering. "I justify it because sometimes responsibility isn't just about profits. It's about doing what's right. There's a family. A little girl named Lily, and her sister Emma, whose lives were in my hands, and I couldn't walk away. I won't. And while some may see this as distraction, I see it as perspective. If we, as humans, can't act with compassion, what is our success truly worth?" A murmur went through the room, some nodding reluctantly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. He continued, his voice firm but carrying an unexpected authority. "I've built this company on ambition, on vision, on strength. But ambition without humanity is hollow. And right now this is the right thing to do." The silence was long. Then, slowly, the chairman leaned forward. "David, you understand the risks. Your actions may cost us credibility, may raise questions about your priorities." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I will not argue against morality. We will discuss a path forward, but I trust your judgment. Clearly, you believe this is necessary." David exhaled quietly. A tension he hadn't realized he was holding easing just slightly. He nodded. "It is necessary. And I am prepared to manage the consequences." Back in the neighborhood, Emma had been pacing nervously while waiting for David's return. The news of the media coverage hadn't reached her yet, but she felt a ripple of anxiety she couldn't explain. When David walked in, he looked different. Calmer. Yet heavier somehow. He closed the door behind him, and the two stood in silence for a moment. Finally Emma asked, "Is everything okay?" David smiled faintly. "Better than okay. They questioned me, but I stood my ground. This was bigger than a boardroom. It's about what's right." Emma studied his face. The lines of worry and determination etched deeply. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You've risked so much for us." He walked over and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't need to thank me. I'm here because it matters. And because I've realized that life is too short to ignore what truly matters." Lily, sensing the tension had eased, crawled into David's lap, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "You're not going anywhere, right?" she asked innocently, her eyes wide and trusting. David's heart swelled, and he hugged her tightly. "No, Lily. I'm not going anywhere. Not for you, not for Emma, not ever." Emma watched them, tears pricking at her eyes. The bond they had formed was stronger than any obstacle. Yet she knew the world outside their door was relentless. And the path forward would test their resilience in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Days turned into weeks. David continued to support Emma and Lily with unwavering commitment. Ensuring Lily's treatments progressed smoothly, and Emma could focus on her education and well-being. But whispers of his involvement grew louder in the city, and soon, questions were being raised at every level in the media, in society, and within his own company. David, however, remained unshaken. Every visit to Emma and Lily strengthened his resolve. Every laugh from Lily, every smile from Emma, reminded him why he had chosen this path. He had faced countless boardroom battles, dealt with rivals and critics. But none of that had prepared him for this. Facing the challenge of keeping his heart open in a world that valued power over compassion. And yet, in the quiet moments, when he watched the sisters together, he understood something profound: love, commitment, and humanity weren't weaknesses. They were strength. Strength that could survive scrutiny, judgment, and fear. Strength that could endure even when the world seemed ready to crumble. One evening, as the three of them sat together, Lily playing with her teddy bear, Emma whispered softly, "David, thank you for not giving up on us. For standing by us when no one else would." David's voice was quiet but full of conviction. "I promised I wouldn't. And I won't. This family, this bond, it's more important than anything else I've ever built." The Emma reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Then let's face whatever comes next together." David looked at her, a small smile forming, one that carried hope, love, and an unspoken promise. "Together," he echoed. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, deals were still being made, and the world still demanded attention. But inside that small apartment, a new kind of empire was being built. One not of wealth or power, but of trust, love, and family. And David knew, deep in his heart, that no headline, no boardroom, and no challenge could ever take that away from him. For the first time in years he felt truly alive. And this time, he wasn't alone. The city outside had never felt colder to David than it did that morning. Rain pelted the streets, blurring the neon lights and reflections of towering skyscrapers. Yet inside him, a storm raged far stronger than the one outside. The headlines had multiplied overnight. Billionaire CEO's secret family in low-income neighborhood. David Reynolds prioritizes a child over company profits. The words, meant to shame, cut deep. Boardroom whispers, investor calls, and social media frenzy painted him as reckless, even foolish. But David's mind wasn't on the anger or judgment of strangers. It was on Emma and Lily, the small apartment, the laughter that now filled its rooms, and the fragile hope he had promised never to abandon. He knew what mattered. All the wealth, power, and accolades in the world could not replace the lives he had come to protect. That morning, he drove through the rain, each drop streaking the windshield like a reminder of the battles yet to come. Emma opened the door, hair damp from the drizzle, eyes tired but resolute. She studied him silently, sensing the tension he carried. "Are they going to come after you?" she asked softly, stepping aside to let him in. David shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe. But whatever happens, nothing will change this. Not Lily, not you, not us." Lily, clutching her teddy bear, peeked from behind Emma. "David, you came." Her voice was a mixture of excitement and relief. She ran and jumped into his arms. For a moment, the world outside, the headlines, the scrutiny, the judgment, didn't exist. All that existed was this fragile, beautiful bond between them. Days turned into a series of challenges. At the company, tensions escalated. David's absence from key meetings and public events raised eyebrows, questions, and complaints. The board demanded explanations. Investors expressed concern, and the media's scrutiny grew relentless. It seemed the world had no patience for someone who chose humanity over profit. Yet David remained steadfast. Each morning, he returned to Emma and Lily, bringing groceries, paying bills, and most importantly, offering his presence. He became the shield they had always lacked. Emma, initially hesitant to lean on anyone, slowly found herself sharing her fears and dreams, allowing herself to be vulnerable. She realized that David's unwavering support was not pity. It was partnership, respect, and a kind of love she had never imagined. One evening, Emma and David sat on the small balcony of their apartment. The city glistened below, wet from rain, lights reflecting like tiny stars. Emma's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "I can't stop thinking about what you've risked for us," she admitted. I don't know if I deserve this." David took her hand gently. "You deserve everything. Not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. I didn't do this to earn gratitude. I did it because it was right. And because I couldn't imagine letting you face this world alone." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "You've changed our lives, David. And not just for Lily, my life too. I thought I could only survive, not live. But now," her voice trailed off, overwhelmed by emotion. David smiled softly, leaning closer. "Now you can live. And we'll do it together." The weeks that followed were a balancing act. Lily's health improved steadily under the care of the best doctors David had flown in. Emma continued her studies and even found time to volunteer at a local center for children, inspired by the generosity she had received. David, though pressured from every angle of his corporate world, refused to step back from the family he had chosen. Then came the pivotal day. A media interview scheduled to confront the rumors and scrutiny. Cameras flashed, questions were asked, and for a moment, David felt the familiar unease of being in the spotlight. But he no longer feared the judgment of others. He spoke with sincerity, vulnerability, and courage. "Yes," he admitted to the reporters. "I chose to prioritize a little girl and her sister. I chose to show compassion. And if that makes me reckless in the eyes of the world, so be it. But there is no business achievement, no wealth, no empire that can compare to saving a life, or giving someone hope. Emma and Lily have taught me more about strength, love, and humanity than any boardroom ever could. And I will never regret that choice." The world paused. Headlines shifted. Some criticized, yes, but many celebrated. Stories of kindness, courage, and true humanity spread across news outlets and social media. David's choice inspired others, proving that true leadership was not just about power, but about heart. Back in their apartment, Lily ran to David, hugging him tightly. Emma followed, smiling through her tears. "You did it," she whispered. "You faced the world for us." David crouched down to meet their eyes. "No," he said gently. "We did it. Together. And in that small, warm apartment." Surrounded by laughter, love, and hope, Emma realized something she hadn't dared to dream: life could be beautiful again. She didn't need to carry the burden alone anymore. She had family now, not just by blood, but by choice, heart, and loyalty. One quiet evening, David and Emma sat together while Lily slept, her small hand resting on the teddy bear that had witnessed their journey from fear to hope. Emma looked at David, her heart full. "I never imagined happiness could feel like this," she admitted softly. David smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Happiness isn't something you imagine, Emma. It's something you choose. And something you fight for. And we've fought together." Emma leaned her head on his shoulder, a quiet peace settling over them. The city outside continued its endless rush. But inside their apartment, time slowed. For once the future didn't feel uncertain. It felt full of possibilities. Lily woke briefly, stretching her small arms. "David, you're really my big brother, right?" she asked, sleep still in her eyes. David hugged her gently. "Yes, Lily. I'm your big brother. And I'll always be here." And Emma watched them, tears of gratitude flowing freely. She knew the journey ahead would have challenges. That life would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time, she didn't feel alone. She had someone she could trust. Someone who would never abandon them, and a little girl whose laughter reminded her of why life was worth fighting for. The storm outside subsided, leaving the city washed clean by the rain. And in that calm, warm light, three hearts intertwined. Emma's, Lily's, and David's. Ready to face the world together. Stronger than ever. As David looked out the window, he realized one thing with absolute certainty: power, wealth, and influence could buy comfort. But they could never buy love, trust, or the kind of family he had found with Emma and Lily. That truth was priceless, unshakable, and infinitely more rewarding than anything he had ever known. And in that moment, with Lily's soft breathing filling the room, and Emma's hand resting in his, he knew their story was no longer about struggle. It was about hope, resilience, and the power of choosing love over fear. This was their miracle, not sudden or dramatic, but steady, real, and transformative. And as the city lights twinkled in the distance, David whispered quietly, almost to himself, "This is home." And Emma turned, smiled, and whispered back, "Yes, home." Lily yawned, her small voice sleepy but content. "Can we stay together forever?" David chuckled softly, holding both Emma and Lily close. Forever, he promised. And so, the three of them, bound not by blood but by heart, began the rest of their lives, together, unbreakable, and full of love. If you felt the journey of David, Emma, and Lily touch your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring and emotional stories that remind us what truly matters in life.